Spo-
Today, Scooby-Doo meets Davy Jones.
Eager to get the production mistake started as soon as possible, the producers began immediately by misspelling Davy Jones' name. There's no E in Davy. Visiting a Scottish castle that had been transported to the United States and turned into a tourist attraction, the gang meet teen idol Davy Jones, whose uncle owns the estate. They offer to help investigate a haunting which threatens to force the old man to surrender his property. The late Davy Jones was best known for being a member of the 1960s pop music group The Monkees, though by the time this episode was produced, the band had dissolved and Jones was a struggling solo artist. The Monkees were American television's answer to the Beatles, and though dogged by allegations that the members didn't play their own instruments, all four bandmates were talented musicians and would occasionally reunite over the years. In addition to the Monkees and his musical career, Jones had been a successful stage actor prior to his television fame, and would later appear in occasional film and numerous television roles, though admittedly usually playing himself. Fun fact, the reason David Bowie is called David Bowie is because he was born David Jones and stopped performing under that name, due in no small part to not wanting to be confused with Davy Jones of the Monkees.
Imagine visiting an actual 14th century Scottish castle.
Immediately after the title card spelling error, the opening scene here features Velma speaking while clearly not moving her lips.
I understand it was brought over here brick by brick.
You sure your girls want to go? They claim this place is haunted.
Haunted! Haunted?
You'd think by now Shaggy and Scooby would realize that any sightseeing spot Fred takes them is going to be haunted. He just lives for screwing with them.
Scooby, you wouldn't.
You couldn't.
You shouldn't. You would.
He could.
He did.
That was our entire lunch.
Sure, Scooby is an asshole for eating all their food, but it's really Shaggy and the gang's fault for not training him better. This is another Scooby episode with two villains working together. This time it's the Duke of Strathmore and his accomplice, local farmer Cyrus Wheatley. They disguise themselves as a ghostly mounted knight and moat monster respectively, hoping to ruin the tourist attraction. This would somehow force Davy's uncle Sedgwick, the Earl of Hagglethorne, to give the castle to the Duke. By the way, in real life, Davy Jones did not have an Uncle Sedgwick, and his family was of mainly English descent, not Scottish. Also, Hagglethorne does not appear to exist anywhere in the United Kingdom. There's also no Duke of Strathmore, though Scotland does have an Earl of Strathmore. Undoubtedly, the Scooby writers didn't want to feature any unrelated real-life people in the show, unless they were on the wrong side of the war.
Hi, Editor Joe here. It wasn't until I got to this point in the process that I discovered this guy is a registered you-know-what offender. I suppose that makes it that much better that the Scooby writers didn't include him.
We're looking for the Hagglethorne Castle.
Stay away from that place. They say at midnight the haunted horseman rides through the castle. A ghostly knight in armor on a glowing horse, doomed to ride the corridors of Hagglethorne Hall for all eternity.
Wait a minute. An old castle brought overseas stone by stone to be used as a tourist attraction, and the gang is warned not to visit by the villain who wants to scare visitors away. Why does this sound familiar? As for the Duke and the Crooked Farmer's intentions for what they want to do with the castle once they get their hands on it,
if this keeps up, the castle will fall into the hands of his cousin, the Duke of Strathmore, and he plans to dismantle the place and sell the bricks for souvenirs.
Oh, how heartless.
And for helping him, I would have collected half the money from the sale of the castle.
this might be the usual run-of-the-mill Scooby-Doo villain plot of dressing like a monster and scaring people away, but I must admit, tearing down a castle to sell the bricks as souvenirs is unique, if not insane. How would this work exactly? For the sake of argument, let's pretend that the villain's plot succeeded and they had full legal access to the castle. First, they'd have to dispose of all personal effects inside the building. An auction or estate sale could take care of this, but it's unlikely they would get even half the value of the property that way, and anything left unsold would have to be discarded. Once empty, the next step would involve removing the individual parts of the castle, tearing down any paint, plaster, and iron or wood joints covering the bricks, not to mention removing windows, doors, and any other fixtures. This would also include any plumbing and electrical components and whatever materials make up the roof and turrets, most likely wood and slate. When left with nothing but the shell of the castle, the individual bricks and stone would need to be neatly separated from the mortar that binds them together. It's unlikely that every brick would be able to be salvaged this way, so the materials comprising the structure would already lose quite a bit of its resale value. Finally, whatever bricks were salvageable would have to be cleaned and stored somewhere prior to sale. The Duke and Wheatley couldn't simply leave the castle as is and remove bricks as needed, because not only would this present a safety concern, as a partially dismantled structure could collapse at any time, but it's unlikely any reputable city or county government would allow an unsafe eyesore like that to remain standing.
Poor Uncle Sedgwick is down to his last farthing.
There is no way a Scottish noble and a single farmer would be able to do all of this themselves, so they would have to hire a construction crew. As mentioned in the episode, dismantling the castle and shipping it from Scotland the first time nearly bankrupted Davy's uncle, meaning the cost of all this work would likely be no less than $100,000 in 1970s money. While this figure may seem high for what sounds like a simple construction job, remember they're not smashing the castle apart with sledgehammers, bulldozers, and wrecking balls. This is a salvage operation requiring a lot more time and finesse to avoid damaging the materials as much as possible. The Duke and Wheatley would go through all this time-consuming preparation at a ridiculous cost just to get to the point of having a saleable product. And once at that point, what then? How would they actually sell the bricks? This was long before the internet, and they weren't yet selling Scottish nobility titles as a novelty item. So what would be the marketing plan? Would the Duke and Wheatley offer their bricks via catalog sales? Sell them wholesale to department stores? Advertise in the pages of a comic book? Or perhaps ship them back to Scotland for existing castles over there to sell as authentic souvenir bricks? This is undoubtedly the most believable way of making a profit. Souvenirs are typically something you sell to people after they visit someplace notable like a zoo or amusement park. Why would anyone in the middle of the rural United States be interested in buying bricks from a Scottish castle? It's also conceivable that the Duke and Wheatley may have been hoping to create a new fad for Americans to own a piece of Scotland that doesn't make you wake up in a puddle of your own sick. Considering how 3 years after this episode aired, the pet rock craze swept the nation, this could have worked. Okay, now let's assume they emptied and dismantled the castle, successfully cleaned and processed the bricks, and found a way to market them. How would they be shipped to their customers? It's likely the United States Post Office would be the most cost-effective both in pricing and the fact they would accept a brick without packaging provided it contained the correct postage and mailing labels. The two villains would save money on shipping materials, but they'd still have to worry about stamps. Finding package rate history for the 1970s is difficult, so let's just use today's post office pricing and adjust for inflation. If we assume each brick is roughly standard at 4 to 5 pounds each, postage would cost $8.74 per brick. Adjusting for inflation would put the shipping costs close to $1.20 each in 1972. Now that we've roughly determined the cost of the prep work, and going by how most novelty items back then were usually priced around $1, it's not unreasonable to assume that the Duke and Wheatley would market theirs at $1 per brick, plus another $1.25 for shipping and handling, bringing the customer's total cost to $2.25 or $16.38 in today's money. That would be pricey even for buying a souvenir knickknack at Disneyland, let alone a chunk of rock that you must take on faith originated as a piece of a Scottish castle. But let's assume the two men successfully sold all the bricks. What would be their profit? For this, we'd have to determine just how much inventory they had to sell. We'll never know for certain exactly how many bricks made up the shell of Hagglethorne Hall, but a quick Google search suggests that 2 million bricks isn't unreasonable for a castle of the size shown in the episode. Let's speak conservatively and assume that 1 million bricks were salvaged in good enough size and shape to sell as souvenirs. Excluding the shipping costs paid by the customer, if each brick brought in $1, that would give the Duke and Wheatley a gross profit of $1 million. Subtracting the earlier estimate of $100,000 for deconstruction and salvage would drop the profits to $900,000. But what about the cost of labor to process customer orders and ship the bricks out? The Duke was a nobleman who certainly wouldn't feel it his place to engage in manual labor like that, and Wheatley had his farm to maintain. So they would absolutely have to hire employees. These employees would also have to have a place to work, probably a warehouse where the bricks would be stored until shipped. This means buying or renting a property, as well as utilities and insurance. In addition, there's also marketing the bricks, including print ads and TV and radio spots. Taxes also need to be figured into the cost of doing business. Thus, it's not unreasonable to assume another $100,000 in total operating expenses for a business of that size and scope. This brings the possible profits down to $800,000, or just under $6 million in today's money. When split between the two men, it comes to a little under $3 million each. This would certainly be a good profit for a farmer like Wheatley, but would it be worth it for a wealthy nobleman like the Duke of Strathmore? Of course, all of this had been under the assumption that every brick would sell, but even if they do, they're probably not going to sell out all at once. Despite the potential for becoming a fad, these are chunks of rocks, not Beanie Babies. It's likely such an operation could take years until the inventory is completely depleted, and due to ongoing expenses like labor, the longer it takes to sell out, the less profit the Duke and Wheatley would make. In fact, there is an extremely strong probability that this brick-selling venture of the two villains could fail completely and lose them money. Considering how popular the castle tourist attraction appears to be at the end of the episode, it's clear the best option for the Duke and Wheatley would be to keep the castle as is and continue running it as a tourist attraction. Or simply sell it to a real estate speculator or wealthy douchebag who always wanted to live in his own castle. Did the Duke just want to tear the place down out of spite? This might have been the actual goal. It's implied in the episode that the Duke and Davy's uncle had an adversarial relationship, so perhaps knowing how much the Earl of Hagglethorne loved the castle, the Duke just wanted an excuse to destroy the place and roped in a gullible local farmer to help. He might have known all along that the plan to sell the bricks was ludicrous and would never actually make any profit. I'm giving this design a score of 2 out of 5. It would normally get a 1 for being ridiculously impractical, but I'm doubling that for just how batshit insane it is. Just starting out, one of the villain costumes loses a point for lack of originality, as a spooky knight was literally the very first monster ever featured in the Scooby-Doo franchise. However, as this episode is set in a European castle, it's at least more appropriate here than an American museum.
Gregory, you saw something in the moat?
Uh-huh. You saw a giant frog?
Yeah, sure you did.
Knowing Scooby, I'm surprised it wasn't a giant dog biscuit.
There it is again, denying when Scooby or Shaggy say they saw something creepy, despite years of them always being right. Remember when I said Scooby being an asshole was the gang's fault? On second thought, they deserve having their lunch stolen. The moat monster was just as fitting a disguise as the Haunted Horseman, considering the idea of a creature inhabiting the water-filled trench obstructing access to a fortification is a well-established concept. The Haunted Horseman, too, was extremely well put together. Although being a Scottish noble, the Duke of Strathmore likely had access to any number of suits of armor. It was also impressive that he used an actual living horse as part of his ensemble, which would require good equestrian skills on his part, maintaining control over the horse enough to maneuver it around the inside of a castle. The Duke would also have to keep the animal from being bothered by the heavy armor and paint used for the disguise. This is trickier than it sounds. While making The Wizard of Oz, the crew had to act quickly when filming the colored horses because they would lick the powder off and ruin the disguise. They being the horses, not the film crew. Any powder the crew was licking was probably white. The Duke's Haunted Horseman outfit also included special effects, but not without a glaring discrepancy.
Well, we found the haunted horseman, but we didn't get a chance to prove him a phony.
The way he goes through those walls proved one thing to me. He's not a phony. He's a real ghost.
The way the horseman appeared in the fireplace and allegedly passes through solid walls, not to mention his obvious transparency, would ordinarily mean this was just another Scooby-Doo villain using a film projector. However, this can't be the case because at one point Scooby is seen riding on the back of the horse, even though it's clearly transparent.
He went right through him. A movie projector. Somebody was trying to convince us that it's a real ghost.
Except later, Davy and the girls come across a different armored knight than the Haunted Horseman. Davy tries to tackle it and ends up going straight through it. Here they find a film projector to explain the effect, despite this knight having not appeared transparent like the horseman chasing the others.
Look at Scooby. He's glowing. Just like the haunted horseman and his haunted horse.
It's luminous paint.
So that's how they did it.
The Haunted Horseman never once glowed like that in the entire episode. Scooby is yellow and flashing, while the Ghost Knight was always gray and transparent. I can't really find an in-universe explanation for this discrepancy, so I have to assume the animators were too cheap or lazy to render glowing effects like they did for Captain Cutler. It's also possible that halfway through production, the script changed from having the Haunted Horseman use a projector to simply being covered in special paint, and by then it was too late and too expensive to reanimate the earlier scenes. After all, the new Scooby-Doo movies was a nightmare of continuity issues and off-model animation.
What do we do?
It beats the heck out of me.
I've got it, Davy. You could sing for him.
I know a place where I am going, and the place where I am going's just around the bend.
Known primarily as a singer, the producers went out of their way to shoehorn in a moment for Davy Jones to sing, though they didn't do the same for Sonny and Cher, possibly because that duo was more popular with older people, while Jones was beloved by teenagers. Regardless, this whole sequence is baffling. In film and television, music is either diegetic or non-diegetic. Diegetic is music or sound that emanates from within the story itself. For example, since I already mentioned Sonny and Cher, in Groundhog Day, the song I Got You Babe is played on the clock radio that awakens Bill Murray every morning. The audience hears it, and so do the characters in the scene. Non-diegetic music is more common, such as the background score commonly heard in almost all film and television. In this situation, Davy is urged by Daphne and Velma to sing, and he does, but he is also accompanied by music from nowhere. To the girls in the audience, it should have sounded like this. I know a place where I am going, and the place where I am going's just around the bend. Just a cappella, with no supporting music.
The things that you see, you've only been dreaming, but I can make your dreams come true. And I love you, you know it's true, and I can make you happy if you love me too.
Then Davy's singing continues as he and the girls are running and hopping away, and Davy's lips aren't moving either. Okay, fine. Davy Jones can sing while running, and he's an expert ventriloquist. But there is no way in hell he could sing underwater through a straw. Wheatley's Moat Monster was a very practical design. Since it wasn't a ghost, it didn't need any special effects other than how it looked. And like Captain Cutler and the Sharkmen, allowing the wearer to survive underwater made for a quick getaway if needed, as well as ample areas for hiding between the moat and water-filled caverns under the castle. It should also be mentioned that Wheatley was pretty spry for a middle-aged farmer, considering how easily he was able to hop and chase Davy and the girls like that. I'm as old as this episode is, and it takes 2 days for my knees to stop aching after mowing the yard.
This is going to come as a shock to you guys, but we've got to stop running and lure that haunted horseman back to somehow prove he's a fake.
Both disguises were also scary enough to keep the gang running in fear, despite Fred insisting that they need to prove the haunted horseman was a phony. I'm giving the Duke and Wheatley a 4 out of 5 for the costumes. They were suitable for the location, included special effects, and effectively scared the gang, but their score drops a little for the lack of originality, and for something that will be mentioned in the next section. As shown by some of my previous videos, occasionally by the time the gang get involved in a mystery, the villain has already almost succeeded.
To the Honourable Duke of Strathmore, London, England, I am turning Hagglethorne Castle and its entire contents over to you to dispose of as you see fit.
Please, Uncle, don't mail that letter yet.
Well, all right. You have until 8 o'clock this evening, but not 1 minute more.
In this episode, by the time they arrived at Hagglethorne Hall, Davy's Uncle Sedgwick was literally writing a letter giving up the castle to the Duke of Strathmore. We even see one of the villains behind him watching and listening to him doing so. This was likely the Duke himself in the armor, as Scooby had just run into Wheatley as the moat monster. This was, incidentally, the same suit of armor that Davy Jones tried tackling later and was established to be a film projection. The Duke had already won at this point, and he knew it. All he had to do was nothing. If he and Wheatley had simply left the castle, the gang would have had nothing to work with. The Haunted Horseman proved to be a good disguise from the logistics side, as it was both scary and appropriate to the location. However, using a live animal in your scheme can prove problematic, as they are known to sometimes act in an unpredictable manner. It's even worse if the animal in question requires a lot of maintenance. Most of us aren't farmers, and even fewer of us are farriers, so we can't appreciate just how much time and care a horse requires. In addition to the obvious things like food and water, both the riding equipment and body of the horse needs routine maintenance, particularly the hooves.
But I've an idea this is no ghost.
No? What happened?
Horseshoe nail! That proves it's no ghost.
A lost horseshoe.
Do you realize what this means?
Yeah, somewhere down here there's a barefoot horse.
No, silly. It means we're on the right track.
It's clear the Duke neglected this aspect of his mount, because if he had been paying attention, his horse wouldn't have lost the nails in the shoe, and the gang wouldn't have found evidence that the animal was real, and thus the Haunted Horseman wasn't supernatural. Also, in real life, horses smell, and having a live one running through the hallways of a castle would make it extremely apparent that the animal is real. Not to mention other biological evidence that there was a very large animal with a working digestive system around the place. In other words, the gang was lucky that a horseshoe was the only thing that ended up in their hands by the end of the episode. Every clue the gang found was due to the Haunted Horseman or the moat monster chasing them. The nail, the horseshoe, the glowing paint. The gang would likely have found none of these things by the 8 o'clock deadline set by Davy's uncle. But instead, both the Duke and Wheatley chase the gang from one clue to another until both are captured and their plot exposed. Well, until one of them is captured. Wheatley was still wearing his dive suit. Why didn't he make a break for it by jumping into the moat? It's not like Fred and the rest had their scuba outfits handy. He could have easily made it back to his farm by the time the authorities were summoned and already been out of the county with whatever money and personal possessions he could have quickly stuffed into a suitcase.
Quick, girls, across this gorge.
Don't look down.
It's the end of the line.
We're trapped. Here he comes.
Speaking of Wheatley, at one point he chased Davy and the girls to the opposite side of a stone bridge, trapping them there, and it was clear he was about to cross it. If he was planning on harming them, what was the plan? Despite the obvious athleticism shown earlier during the chase, he was still a middle-aged man against 2 teenage girls and a 26-year-old man, all in the peak of their physical condition. Wheatley wasn't armed, so was he planning on beating the 3 of them to death with his flippers? Tossing them off the stone platform to be crushed below or drown?
He did it.
I don't believe it!
You better believe believe it.
Oh wait, I forgot Scooby villains get superhuman strength when they're in disguise. Wheatley could have popped their heads off like dandelions.
It's more of a lonesome chicken.
It's Scooby howling. That's no monster. It's a man in a wetsuit.
Fortunately for the gang, Scooby also suddenly exhibited a power he'd never shown up to this point in the franchise. Essentially, the Scooby-Dooverse version of that time Superman pulled his shield off his chest to trap a villain in saran wrap. The moat monster is stopped and exposed as a man in a suit. A very lucky man in a suit, as that falling stalactite could have easily skewered him. Wheatley chasing Davy and the girls onto that platform is another example of something that's always bothered me over the years watching Scooby-Doo.
Do I really look like a guy with a plan? You know what I am? I'm a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I caught it.
Many Scooby villains personify what the Joker was telling Dent. They chase after the gang, and while their goal is to simply get the meddling kids away from whatever scheme they're hatching, what happens if they manage to catch the meddlers? We've seen members of the gang trapped numerous times over the years, but they always escape because deep down, most bad guys do not want to catch them. This is why I give such a high score to any who attempt to murder Scooby or the rest, because they're the only villains who truly appreciate the stakes they're playing for. We can't know Wheatley's intentions on crossing that bridge, so neither he nor the Duke get points for attempted murder. And while, as said, their plot for seizing the castle was in the bag by the time the gang arrived, the villains' own actions contributed entirely to their downfall. Especially Wheatley giving up at the end when he wasn't actually caught. So I'm giving them a 2.5 out of 5 for the operation. The Haunted Horseman and Moat Monster get a final due score of 2.8 out of 5.
Achoo!
Gesundheit.
What's the matter there, young feller?
I always sneeze when there's straw around.
Really, Shaggy? Because you've been around straw lots of times without sneezing.
Oh, Shaggy, what could happen to you in an old castle?
You know, that's just what Henry VIII said to Anne Boleyn.
Oh, brother.
That's a dark joke for a Scooby episode.
Come on, let's go in.
After that welcome?
It's probably just an act they put on to give the tourist a scare.
I've got news for you. It works.
Where's Scooby?
Yes? We came to tour the castle.
But if you're busy, we'll come back later.
Like 1987.
Unfortunately for Shaggy, in 1987, he'd be too busy dealing with another haunted mansion he inherited from his own uncle.
The poor thing might be hurt. Let's help him out of this outfit.
Women. Go figure them out.
Yeah, women. Always wanting to help injured people. This isn't the first time Fred said something sexist in this series. The 1970s.
This isn't armor. It's a bunch of tin cans.
I did the best I could with what I had.
Looks like the best was none too good.
Seriously, Fred is an asshole. And frankly, for being made out of tin cans, I think most professional cosplayers would say that's a pretty decent outfit.
Well, he's a very rare breed. He's part terrier and part terrified.
I hope Scooby eats all their dinner, too.
That's Uncle Sedgwick, the first Earl of Hagglethorne. He brought this castle over from Scotland, brick by brick.
Wow, no wonder he's sitting down.
Was that a joke at the expense of a handicap? Fucking 1970s.
Don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of this.
They've fallen into the moat.
What perfect timing. It's Saturday.
That's a joke probably lost on a lot of modern viewers. While the idea of showering daily is now pretty much standard practice for most living here in the United States, back in the 1970s and earlier, that wasn't always the case for many people. Baths were sometimes taken only once per week, and that was usually on a Saturday, so everyone would be clean for church the next morning.
Have you no ethics? No honor?
No faithfulness?
Of course, but there's something that goes deeper than all those things.
What?
Cowardice.
Davy Jones was an actor, renowned singer, and apparently an extremely adept impressionist.
Hey, gang, this is no time for clowning. We've got to track down that haunted horseman before dark.
Davy Jones was only 5'3", but here he is towering over Daphne and Velma, who are supposed to be 5'7" and 4'9" respectively. Fred is almost 6 feet tall, and here Davy is shown to be his height. Before he got into acting, Davy Jones was planning to be a jockey. I just find it amusing how the animators made Jones almost a foot taller, but the Three Stooges were always depicted as short as they were in real life.
Shaggy, Scooby, and I will check the upstairs rooms, while Daphne, Velma, and Davy cover the downstairs.
Come on, girls. Let's track down this spooky specter.
You, sure you want to leave the girls alone with the teen idol pop musician, Fred? I mean, they're clearly into it. Even Velma.
Wait, where did that chair come from?
Scotland, I guess.
I mean, it wasn't there a moment ago.
There you go, imagining again.
Even Daphne doesn't take her teammates' concerns about suspicious activities seriously, despite them literally investigating supernatural shenanigans. This is a direct result of Fred's poor leadership.
Let us in! Let us in!
Let us out! Let us out!
There's no place to hide.
Only a miracle can save us now.
It's miracle! Josephus! Davy!
When our friend wore the moat monster getup, his footprints were side by side because he was hopping like a frog. But when his costume was destroyed, he started to run like a human being.
That is an extremely clever bit of writing for a Scooby-Doo episode of this era. I am genuinely impressed.
Velma, you're a genius.
You're just saying that for one reason, because it's true.
I've had people ask why I'll occasionally refer to Velma as being smug.
Fellas, I've got news for you. Your hunting license has just expired.
Huh? What does hunting have to do with anything in this episode? Do you suppose this was a leftover line from an earlier draft of the script that may have had the Duke planning on turning the castle into a hunting lodge? That would have made a lot more sense than selling bricks as souvenirs.
Goodbye, gang, and thanks.
Did I mention Davy Jones was only 5'3"?
Today, Scooby-Doo meets Jerry Reed.
After being invited to attend his Nashville concert, the gang discovered their friend, famous musician Jerry Reed, is missing. While searching for him, they run up against a couple of bank robbers determined to stop Reed from performing. The late Jerry Reed was a popular country singer and songwriter whose music career could be said to have peaked in the 1960s and 70s before he embarked on a reasonably successful acting career. His most famous role was arguably Cletus the Snowman Snow from 1977's wildly popular Smokey and the Bandit, the main theme of which was also sung by Reed. My parents' generation would likely remember Jerry Reed more as a singer, while my generation would always know him best as the aforementioned Snowman the Trucker. Millennials would likely remember him as Adam Sandler's nemesis in The Waterboy, his final film role before passing away 10 years later in 2008. Interestingly enough, Reed's acting career started with his performance here on the new Scooby-Doo movies, and unlike others who guest starred in the series, his career was still thriving at the time, including having a song he wrote break the top 10 on the Billboard charts the year before. In keeping with Reed's status as a country singer, this episode is set in Nashville, Tennessee, famous for its country and western music scene, with the majority of the action taking place in the Grand Ole Country Music Hall, which is an obvious amalgam of the Grand Ole Opry and the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, both located in Nashville.
Boy, it sure was nice of Jerry Reed to invite us to his opening.
This episode breaks with the established routine by having the gang already being acquainted with the guest star, as he was their friend who invited them to the Country Music Hall in the first place. Though I am curious how Scooby and the rest came to know Jerry Reed personally. It's never mentioned how they met, despite other episodes usually dropping a line about Scooby having saved their friend's life or having a relative introduce them. It's a nice change of pace from the usual ridiculously convenient run-ins with famous people the series has resorted to so far, as if Scooby was the cartoon canine version of Forrest Gump. My mama always said life was like a box of Scooby snacks. On an unrelated note, while watching this episode, I couldn't help but notice how much easier it was to make out the dialogue, and it took me a while to realize it was because there was no infuriating laugh track drowning out half of the speech. Like the great Alan Spencer, I fucking hate laugh tracks. And while editing the last few videos, it became apparent just how much more intrusive it was in this series compared to Scooby-Doo Where Are You? There were several times when I had to pull up the subtitles just to make out what was being said. Come to find out, Hanna-Barbera's penny pinching once again reared its ugly head, this time with the studio deciding to produce their own laugh track instead of licensing one from a third-party company the industry generally relied on. The new Scooby-Doo Movies was one of their first series done with an in-house laugh track, and wow, does it show that the studio sound engineers did not know what the hell they were doing. Though I sourced all of my copies of the new Scooby-Doo Movies from Amazon Streaming, except for one episode, some apparently come with a laugh track while others don't. I always knew there were some changes made from when they first aired on network television before being released to syndication, but apparently in addition to cut scenes and changed credits, some also omitted the laugh track, and there's no accounting for how they decided which version to release on home video. I can only hope going forward that more episodes drop.
There's Jerry's hotel.
When visiting Nashville, be sure to stay at the Andrew Jackson Hotel, where you can enjoy the Trail of Tears breakfast buffet. You don't even have to worry about tipping the staff because they don't get a salary in the first place.
No, he's not in.
That's funny. He told us to meet him here.
Jerry Reed left this note for you.
Come to the Grand Old Country Music Hall. I'm rehearsing there for tomorrow night's show, Jerry.
There really was an Andrew Jackson Hotel in Nashville where country music singers would often stay while in town, but it was demolished a year before this Scooby episode aired. If the hotel had still been around, this scene where the gang arrive at Reed's lodging only to be immediately sent to the country music hall would have made some sense if the owners had paid Hanna-Barbera for product placement. Since that's not the case, this detour was as pointless as a gummy bear's pencil.
Jerry must be anxious to see us if he wants us to come and watch him rehearse tonight.
That's another Andrew Jackson reference less than a minute after the first one. Nashville does indeed have both a Jackson Street and a Main Street, but they don't actually cross each other in real life. Like the previous episode, this one also contains a villainous duo. Here they are bank robbers Ben Bing and his accomplice Bertha, though we find out later that Bertha was really another man in disguise and his true identity is never mentioned. For the purposes of this analysis, we'll keep referring to him as Bertha.
We interrupt this program for a special bulletin. The Second National Bank was just robbed of $2 million. It's not known how the burglars got into the vault or how they made their escape.
This is a third reference to Andrew Jackson. When that man was president, one of his more famous acts, apart from Native American genocide, was how he oversaw the destruction of the Second National Bank of the United States. Despite typically being horrible students of history, the Scooby writers really seem to know their stuff about the guy on the $20 bill.
Imagine, they spent almost a year digging that tunnel under the bank.
Ben Bing and Bertha had apparently dug a tunnel from under the Country Music Hall to the Second National Bank so they could rob it without being seen. I hesitate to say this was exactly their plan because we never see the tunnel or the bank, and the only time it's mentioned is when Shaggy refers to it near the end. The radio bulletin said the police were baffled as to how the money was stolen from the vault, so it stands to reason they used a secret tunnel.
Secret tunnel!
Incidentally, for those of you who aren't as well read, digging a tunnel to rob a bank from below was a plot point most famously used by Arthur Conan Doyle in one of his Sherlock Holmes stories. I think it was the Hound of the Baskervilles. I'm assuming the dog helped dig the tunnel. Hey, It's the return of the Native American statue. It's been a while since we've seen one of those. Hey, it's also another Andrew Jackson reference. The two bank robbers hid the money in a secret room under the stage at the Country Music Hall and kidnapped Jerry Reed to keep him from performing the next day, presumably to keep anyone from discovering their crime until they got away.
Pretty Mary Sunlight, she's everything I need. Some people sit around.
That's Jerry's voice. It sounds like he's in trouble.
What? No, it doesn't. He's just singing the song. And viewers better hope they like that song, because they're going to hear it so much in this episode, their great-grandchildren will be born with it playing in their heads.
That's Jerry's voice, all right, but it's not him. It's a recording. And who should know better than me? Ben Bing. I'm Jerry's arranger.
Why, got no ranger?
We didn't think so.
When the gang arrived looking for Reed, Ben Bing lied about being the missing musician's arranger, while Bertha, dressed as a cleaning woman, so they could both separately try getting the meddling kids to leave.
We forgot one thing, Velma. How do we get back inside the music hall?
When I turned the lights on backstage, I unlatched the stage door.
I've joked before about how often the gang resorts to breaking and entering, but this really emphasizes just how experienced they are at it. Hey gang, let's be careful as we sneak back into the Country Music Hall. Let's start by parking our garishly colored van right in front of the building.
Locked? Locked!
That proves it, Velma. Somebody doesn't want us back in there.
No, it proves that the people running the Country Music Hall take security somewhat seriously.
Look, Velma's got the door open.
Why would it open for Velma and not for me?
Because, silly, you turned the knob the wrong way.
I'm forced to give Velma the benefit of the doubt here. I couldn't find anything about older doorknobs that only turn in one direction, but did find plenty of information that broken doorknobs can sometimes act like that. To be safe, I contacted my resident boomer expert, and she was unable to recall any time in her life when operable doorknobs that only turn in one direction were standard. After they failed to get rid of the gang, Ben Bing and Bertha disguised themselves as living Viking and Davy Crockett mannequins to try to scare off the gang. They even briefly held Fred and Daphne captive as well. Wait a minute. The gang visit a closed theater where a villain is not only hiding illegal money below the stage, they try to scare away Scooby and the rest with a fake Viking and at one point imprison them under a trapdoor. Why does this sound familiar? I can understand the Native American statue in Davy Crockett, but what do a Viking, samurai, Greek soldier, and African warrior have to do with Nashville or country music? Oh, the producers do know the correct way to spell Davy. Overall, digging a tunnel under the bank from the Country Music Hall was not a bad plan for the villains. As indicated by the radio bulletin, they did successfully pull off their bank heist, and the police were baffled as to how it was done. They got away with $2 million, which would be almost $15 million in today's money. Even split between the two of them, that is absolutely enough to retire comfortably on a tropical island somewhere.
Hey, Velma, at $1.50 each, how many pizzas would that get? I mean, for $2 million?
1,333,033.
While I'm impressed she was able to do math like that so quickly in her head, Velma was still off by 300 pizzas. I'm giving Ben Bing and Bertha a 5 out of 5 for their plan. It was extremely profitable and well worth the risk considering how easily they got the money out of the bank once the tunnel was completed. I had to put on my glasses to properly begin my analysis of Ben Bing and Bertha's outfits. They started off so well with their planning, but clearly spent so little time on their disguises, it's clear they didn't think anyone would stumble upon their theater hideout.
It's addressed to Jerry. If you try to rehearse tonight, you'll never see tomorrow. Signed, the Phantom.
Zoinks! The Phantom!
Phantom!
Right off the bat, let's address the elephant in the room. Despite leaving a threatening note from the Phantom, there's never a phantom in this episode. Ben Bing pretends to be Jerry Reed's arranger and later on borrows a Viking outfit from a mannequin that just happened to be backstage. Bertha, too, started out in one disguise before changing to another, having begun as a cleaning woman before eventually donning Davy Crockett's clothes, also from that same row of mannequins. None of these are ghosts or even shadowy figures wearing a cloak or a hat. Pietro from the Puppet episode looked more like a phantom. In fact, why didn't the Scooby producer simply reuse him? It's not like they're above completely reusing villain models.
Pretty Mary Sunlight, she's all right with me. Pretty Mary Sunlight, she's everything I need.
The outfits feel rushed and like they were given absolutely zero thought. If the writers were going to reference the Phantom of the Opera for the title of this episode, why didn't they go all the way? Instead of a Viking and Davy Crockett, neither of which have anything to do with country music, why not make the eponymous Phantom the ghost of an old singing cowboy who wanted to ruin the theater by using sabotage?
Sabotage? How? When?
To disrupt Jerry Reed's concert. I can't give the outfits a score any higher than a 1 out of 5. This was frankly embarrassing and featured practically Carl the Stuntman levels of mediocrity. F***ing Carl the Stuntman. They started off so well with their planning. Ben Bing and Bertha spent a year meticulously digging a tunnel, successfully robbed a bank of $2 million, and made it back to their hideout. But after that, it was all an uphill struggle. First, why did they hide the money at the country music hall where they also had their tunnel? Sure, the airports, bus terminals, and train stations were being watched by the police, but those are all passages out of the city. Nashville is huge. They could have rented a house 5 miles away and still be in the city. They wouldn't need a plane, bus, or a train. We know they've got a car.
Well, I've seen some funny license plates, but that? Feebag? That's a funny way to spell Ben Bing. Feebag?
Feebag?
Feebag, the same name that is on Ben Bing's license plate.
It just might be letters, like the ones on the xylophone.
Why would you use your license plate number as the secret code to enter your hidden room? Did Ben Bing pick that code because it happened to match his license plate? Or did he order that special vanity license plate so he'd remember the code to the secret room? This is like writing your PIN on the front of your credit card.
Nobody's here but me, Bertha. Now you go.
Sure, but we'll just have a peek in here to see if our friend is rehearsing, okay?
Okay, then you go.
No, not okay. If you're the villain, why would you let the gang have just the peek? They need to leave now, so just threaten to call the cops if they don't. Sure, you don't want any police at the scene of your crime, but at least try. The worst that could happen is the gang would call your bluff and you'd let them search anyway.
Pretty Mary Sunlight, she's all right with me. Pretty Mary Sunlight, she's everything I need.
As for kidnapping Jerry Reed, what the hell were Ben Bing and Bertha thinking? I've made it abundantly clear my thoughts on Scooby-Doo villains resorting to kidnapping. It's a bad idea. But sometimes kidnapping goes beyond just regular bad idea and enters the realm of Return to Zombie Island levels of bad ideas.
Stand clear of the door, Jerry!
And by standing clear, Fred obviously meant stand right next to where the door will slam open. Jerry Reed wasn't some random teenager visiting an abandoned castle in the middle of nowhere. He was, at the time, a reasonably famous and successful musician set to play a concert in the middle of one of the biggest cities known for its music. Granted, the episode glosses over how in real life, Reed would have been surrounded by an entourage at least large enough to include a manager, assistant, roadies, and any number of hangers-on. But generally speaking, if someone of his fame went missing, even for a short period of time, lots of people would notice. Setting aside the unrealistic lack of people helping him prepare for the concert, what did the villains think would happen the next day when concert-goers started filling the country music hall and Jerry Reed was a no-show? Kidnapping him was the surest way to guarantee immediate police involvement, greatly increasing the odds of their secret room being found during the search for the missing musician. The villains should not have kidnapped Jerry Reed. The money was safely hidden. They could have waited a week before removing it, or possibly even smuggled it out a little at a time, hidden in Bertha's cleaning supplies. Indeed, as the airports, bus terminals, and train stations were under police surveillance, it was best for the two villains to wait as long as possible for the heat to die down before attempting to make their getaway. Then again, it's possible Ben, Bing, and Bertha felt they had to move quickly because the longer they waited, the more likely the police would find the hidden tunnel and follow it back to the country music hall where the money was stashed. Again, that just further emphasizes that hiding the money there in the first place was a huge mistake.
I've made a huge mistake.
Somebody must want you out of the way.
Yeah, but who?
Whoever sent that note to you.
And here I thought it was some joker trying to be funny.
They did at least first try scaring Reed away from performing, but their threatening letter didn't even come close to working.
We were lucky. That could have been a bad accident.
Accident nothing. That thing was pushed.
Oh, Shaggy, you and your overactive imagination.
Damn it, Daphne. You guys just found a threatening letter. Why are you so determined to gaslight Shaggy?
Jinkies, it could have been the Phantom.
Thank you, Velma.
The Phantom. He tried to get us.
Where?
In the prop room.
This is no time for wild stories.
Gang, my guitar's missing.
So's the red paint on your right sleeve, Jerry. Failing to scare him off or keeping him locked up, the bank robbers find themselves reduced to stealing Jerry Reed's guitar in an attempt to make him cancel the concert. Because where would he possibly find a replacement guitar in Nashville, Tennessee, a city renowned for its musical heritage? The odds of there being a guitar shop in a place like that are just astronomically low. Sarcasm aside, shouldn't Reed already have a bunch of guitars backstage, tuned up and ready to go? The last thing you want as a professional musician is to have a guitar string break on stage and make the audience wait half an hour as you restring and tune it.
You know, it's lucky for me you guys showed up, or I might still be locked in that room.
I bet when we find your guitar, we also find out who's behind this whole thing.
Velma, you already know who's behind it. Jerry Reed told you he didn't have an arranger. You know it's Ben Bing.
Right in the middle of my concert, the lights went out.
Well, that's probably just a fuse that blew, Shaggy. You know, this place has been closed for over a year.
Jesus! Now Jerry Reed is gaslighting Shaggy as well. Dude, you were kidnapped. The gang spent half the episode trying to find you after you got locked in a room. Why are you questioning Shaggy and Scooby's run-in with the villain?
It was no fuse. We heard the click of the switch.
That was your overactive imagination, Shaggy.
Oh, Daphne, you...
You know, a lot of funny things been happening since I got here. Doors slamming, chains clanking, weird voices coming out of them walls.
Then tell me, Jerry, why are you so quick to dismiss Shaggy and Scooby's story about the lights going out?
We'll have you out in a second, Jerry.
Well, I'm glad you finally got here. My voice was beginning to change.
Not unless you come with us, Jerry.
Well, now you forget I'm opening tomorrow. Now I got to limber up these fingers and these vocal cords.
Shortly after Reed implied how much his voice hurt from all the singing, he says he needs to practice even more. If his concert is tomorrow, the last thing he wants to do is put that much stress on his vocal cords. Singers sometimes have to cancel concerts entirely when that happens. Wait a minute. Would Ben, Bing, and Bertha have redeemed themselves for kidnapping Reed if that had happened? The concert would be canceled, and since Reed would no longer be missing, the police would have no reason to search the country music hall. Hell, instead of kidnapping him, they should have just punched him in the throat or broke his fingers or found any other way of incapacitating him and let him go. If that sounds extreme, remember these two robbed a bank of over $2 million. They were playing for high enough stakes that kidnapping or assault and battery wouldn't add that much more to their prison sentence. Unfortunately for the villains, while they had the guts to break into a bank, they lacked the violent fortitude needed to protect their scheme, as well as the foresight to plan for possible road bumps like the country music hall concert date being moved up, or for trespassers investigating the scene of the crime. When push came to shove, the best they could come up with was a panicked kidnapping and snagging the costumes off some conveniently placed mannequins at their hideout. I'm giving Ben, Bing, and Bertha an operation score of 2 out of 5. They may have succeeded in hauling off $2 million, but everything that came after just kept dropping their score. This leaves the bank robbers with a final due score of 2.7 out of 5.
Hey, Velma, at $1.50 each, how many pizzas would that get?
Before you get excited about the idea of a pizza only costing $1.50, this was 1972. When accounting for inflation, that would be $10.79 in today's money. This is close to the price of a medium pizza at Pizza Hut.
Now that he started singing again, let's not lose him.
If we could only let him know we're looking for him.
Velma, can't you think of something?
Maybe there is a way. Jerry! Jerry!
Yes, Velma once again proving to be the smartest member of Mystery Inc., who figured out the best way to find their missing friend, whose voice is coming through the vent, is to yell back into that same vent. I don't know why it took her until halfway through the episode to figure that out, but hey.
It's not the same kind of sound, Jerry.
You know it ain't, is it? It sounds like Morse code.
Can you read it?
Sure I can read it. Honey, I was in the Navy.
Jerry Reed was in the Army, not the Navy, so I wonder if he felt weird reading this line in the script. You'd think he would mention that to the voice director and change the line while in the booth. It's not like you couldn't have learned Morse code in the Army.
You didn't run out of volunteers yet. Give Daphne a chance.
The girl can't do it. And since you're the only man left, we accept your brave offer to volunteer.
Wow, I guess Fred isn't the only member of the gang with really outdated ideas about feminism.
Fred will release the sandbags, and they'll be hauled up by their heels.
Well, all right, but just be careful now. Don't catch Scooby or Shaggy or Fred.
Jerry Reed has obviously seen a few episodes of Scooby-Doo.
Come on, Scooby, climb aboard, and let's get out of here like fast.
Get one of these dollies and we'll go get 'em.
Wow.
You okay? We'll be fine as soon as we get out of here.
That is not the same trapdoor Shaggy and Scooby were just seen falling into.
A clever scheme, all right. And they'd have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you.
Earlier I talked about how the animators made Davy Jones taller than he was in real life. They did it again with Jerry Reed. He was 6 foot tall, but here he is towering over the 6 foot tall Shaggy.
Actually, if it wasn't for Jerry, he was going to open the music hall a week before the Phantom expected him.
Pretty Mary Sunlight, she's everything I need.
That's an awful lot of empty seats in the theater. This is why you don't start your concert a week earlier than scheduled, Jerry.
When you're hot, you're hot. When you're not, you're not.
When you're hot, you're hot.
When You're Hot, You're Hot was a Jerry Reed song that was popular the year before this episode aired. Don't feel bad if you didn't know that. Because I didn't.
Pretty Mary Sunlight, she's all right with me. Pretty Mary Sunlight, She's everything I need.
And that's my ranking of the villains from the 7th set of episodes of Season 1 of the new Scooby-Doo movies, shown here along with the ones from my previous videos. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. And yes, I know it wasn't the Hound of the Baskervilles. That was a joke. It was probably the Adventure of the Engineer's Thumb. I'm assuming he broke it while using a shovel to dig the tunnel.